Well, everybody, welcome. This is the Seattle Architecture Foundation, and I'm the executive director for the Architecture Foundation. I just have a few announcements to make before we roll into our talk tonight. But as I just mentioned, we are using a closed caption service, and so if it should be running in the screen, and if it bothers you, you can turn that off and disable it. I also want you to know we are recording this talk, so it will be available later if you have to leave early, probably in a week. And those are the questions will go in the Q&A. So if you have questions, please type those in the Q&A, and at the bottom of your screen, you'll see little bubbles there. If you can also put them in the chat box. We will save those for the end, but if you do have something, you can put it in the chat. And then just for those of you that are less familiar with Seattle Architecture Foundation, we are a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to connect people to the built environment and to inspire them to get more involved in shaping our city. We believe that the more you engage with Seattle, the more likely you are to connect to your changing city. And we provide tours, talks, programs for kids and families, and exhibits. We have an upcoming model exhibit, which some of you may have received the call for entries today. So that will open up in August, and we are planning an in-person event, which we are super excited for. We feel really lucky to be able to continue our programming this year. A lot of it has been online now, and we've only been able to do that because of the individual supporters and so many corporate supporters that have stepped up and continued to support us during this unusual time. So for that, I say thank you to all of you. I know a lot of you are on today, so thank you. If you're not a member, though, and you want to support our work, please feel free to join as a member. Go to seattlearchitecture.org, and you'll get discounts on all of our programs and events. We even have some free things coming up. And as we launch our tour season, it becomes an even greater value. So I highly encourage you to do that. I also want to acknowledge that we sit on the traditional land of the Duwamish and Squamish people, a people forced to relocate, but who have persevered. SAF views the history of Seattle to include from time immemorial to today, and is committed to exploring that through our programs and partnerships. Tonight, I'm excited to offer this special program as part of our Design Soiree series. Events through this series are intended to raise funds for SAF while celebrating design with behind-the-scenes events that offer a chance to connect with one another, typically in person. And while we're excited to bring back this series in format in the future, we're also grateful to ZGF for being willing to offer this special tour virtually. ZGF is a longtime supporter of SAF and one of the premier firms shaping the fabric of our city, and most recently the skyline through the F5 skyscraper that many of you are familiar with. And now I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to turn it over to Haruka Saito, an SAF board member and principal of ZGF, to tell us more about our presenter in the program. Haruka joined SAF's board less than a year ago during the pandemic, so she stepped up to the challenge, and we haven't even met each other in person yet, which is it's so hard for those of you that know me not to be able to connect in person, but I've really enjoyed getting to work with her, and she's already made such a big impact through her leadership. Haruka is an architect who spent most of her career in New York, but relocated to Seattle about 7 years ago. She works on a diverse range of public and private projects, including cultural institutions and public streetscapes. Now I'm going to turn it over to her to introduce our speaker and tell you a little bit more about the event.
Thanks so much, Stacy. It's truly my honor to introduce our presenter this evening, Patrick Gordon, principal at ZGF. He's somewhat of a fixture here in Seattle's kind of civic development and building community. In his 4 decades of design, he has shaped iconic spaces, as Stacy already mentioned, the F5 Tower here in Seattle. He's also done all sorts of project types ranging from urban downtown environments to corporate campuses to higher education campuses to cultural institutions. He's really led an amazing effort to design diverse and vibrant workspaces for companies, including the likes of Microsoft, Safeco, Boeing, Amazon, and of course, Expedia that we'll hear about tonight. One of the things that inspires me most about Patrick when we talk is that he is so very knowledgeable about the special moments and opportunities in Seattle's rich urban fabric. And he understands how a view and an inside-outside connection of a space improves not only the experience of the daily life of a worker in a building, but also from the kind of city spectators at large vantage. And this project that he's about to walk you through is exactly about that, how a space, a building, a campus gifted with an incredible site can really sing at multiple scales. So I'm very privileged to call Patrick a colleague and probably more accurately a mentor. So thank you so much for your time, Patrick. And with that, take it away.
Wow. Thank you, Erica. I am blown away by that introduction. And I guess I would, the only thing I would change about it is to take it out of the singular and put the we behind it. I think I'm fortunate enough to be surrounded by amazing colleagues and coworkers, and I think all of the accomplishments that you cited clearly come with the idea that there are many of us involved. But thank you so much for the introduction. And thanks, Seattle Architectural Foundation, for the opportunity to present this tonight. We're honored to be able to do it. It's a project that is, it's been a long time in the making. We're 5 years into our journey on the project. There are people on this call that I know have been involved with this endeavor even longer than that. But it's one of those, in my sense, career opportunities. These kind of projects don't come along this often, where one can work with the quality of the client that we have on this, the insight and the tenacity and the aspirations that they had for the site, the quality of the site itself, which is amazing, and I hope we've done it justice. And the quality of the project team that they assembled to put this together. We've truly honored to do that. I think it's important to maybe share tonight that, is this going? There we go. Like I say, this has been excuse the technology thing. This has been a long journey for us. It's been a journey that I think created some incredible opportunities, some incredible challenges, and the opportunity, like I said earlier, to work with some amazing people. And I really want to thank Expedia for allowing us to share this with you tonight, because you should know that outside of the staff and employees at Expedia, this has not been made public. So you're getting the first peek at it. You're getting a peek at a project that was partially occupied at the end of 2019 before COVID struck. And then after March was essentially devoid of employees, but the construction went on. We finishing the site, the shell and core, and a lot of the TIs that are part of this project. So what we're going to show tonight is, with your indulgence, a lot of photographs, a lot of footage that is really taken where we're trying to show you what's going on, pieces as they finish up, but recognizing that you will see peaks of construction, you will see pieces of incomplete work. So we beg your indulgence for that in the process. We talked a little bit about the site, and I will get into that more, but it's a 40-acre site located just north of downtown Seattle, 2 miles north of downtown Seattle, connected via the Centennial Park, Myrtle Edwards Park, the newly developing Seattle Waterfront, all the way down to the Stadium District. So we think it's an amazing opportunity to not only do a particular site, but to connect it to some pretty amazing things that are happening in Seattle along the waterfront and in the community.
Patrick, are you wanting us to share your screen?
Are you not? Is it not sharing?
No.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
Oh my gosh. Is that happening now, Stacy?
No.
What do we need to do here?
Yeah, I think just go ahead and click share your screen at the bottom and then just reshare.
I'm very sorry.
That's okay.
Now are we seeing it?
Yes.
I apologize for that, and I'm going to back up here a little bit and do this again.
No problem.
This is a pretty rough drone shot. I apologize for the jumpiness of it, but it was intended to be playing while I was talking, and we're not having to look at me, so I do apologize for that. I'm going to let it run for a minute and not talk for the moment, and then come back on here in a second. Actually, I have much better footage. I'm going to stop this and go to the next slide, and we'll come back and show you some of these images. So, as I mentioned, the site is a 40-acre site just north of downtown Seattle, connected by the trails and the parkways that we talked about. It was originally a site that was designed for Immunex, for a research and development facility for Immunex, subsequently sold to Amgen, and then made available to Expedia for purchase after having been vacated. It was a site that was originally designed, as I said, for research and development. 5 buildings, 4 of which were connected directly to each other, 1 building standing alone, and a parking structure. State-of-the-art research and development facilities, really designed for the kind of bench research that was going on inside of those. Amazing buildings in terms of the quality, the kind of work that went into them. And the quality of the construction. And we basically, I'm going to stop it here for a second because I want to talk a little bit about, I at least want to share with you the idea that these were independent buildings. The space that I'm looking at right now is one that I really want you to think about as we get into some of the presentation, because it's part of a major transformation that we made on the site that I think is really important to talk about. Some of the features of the existing project that I think we saw as being challenges was getting a sense of entrance. There was a very limited way to get into the site. We raised the question of, where is the entrance once one arrives here? So it's one of the things that we wanted to think about as we began to master plan this site for Expedia's use. Just exactly trying to identify where is the entrance, where is the center of gravity, if you will, center of action for this campus. It's pretty obvious that the site has an amazing proximity to an amazing attribute of this, which is the Elliot Bay, views of Mount Rainier, views of the mountain, views of downtown. It started off as a very different kind of place. It started off as a very industrial site. The slide on the left is the 1950s era when it was mostly water with a couple of piers and a waterway serving those. Into the 60s when the site was filled and still kind of maintaining an industrial use, primarily focused on again water and rail transportation, which is adjacent to the site. Prior to Immunex doing their development of it, I think this site shows that there had been some development along the waterway. The port in a mitigation measure for the grain terminals built the Centennial Parkway and provided the trail that ran along the perimeter of the site. A trail that merged into 16th Avenue, which was primarily a dead-end street serving the warehouses and the industrial uses along there. But otherwise, a pretty empty site with, prior to the flyover, very difficult access to get to it, sitting there waiting for something to happen. And along came Immunex and developed the site into, as I mentioned, the 5 buildings and the parking structure. a landscape done by Bob Marassi that really began to acknowledge some of the amenities of the site. You know, gave some kind of reference to Mount Rainier in the distance, created some view corridors for the Lower Queen Anne neighborhood, extended the Centennial Park around the site and off onto 16th Avenue. I think those of you who knew the site before, I think may recognize a couple of the difficulties of it. The 90-degree turn here of the public trail was a place for many close calls between pedestrians and bicyclists. It gave us great access to the water, but it certainly didn't take advantage of, I think, the opportunity of its proximity to the site. 16th Avenue was essentially a dead end of parking and access to the previous warehouses that had sit on the site, and a pretty massive expanse of asphalt that had been parking. Talk a little bit about Expedia. You know, Expedia is distinct from Expedia.com. Expedia Group is a platform of travel-oriented companies, a lot of whose names you would know, from HomeAway to Hotels.com to Travelocity, Trivago, Agencia, Hotwire, and et cetera. It's primarily a technology company that is dedicated to serving the travel industry and focuses a lot on the idea of experience, a lot of the idea of the notion of anticipation and destination and departure and arrival and those kinds of things. And so it was coming from an environment, the high-rise environment in Bellevue, mostly located in an 18-story high-rise tower. What I think a lot of us would refer to as an elevator type culture, where it made the difficulty of connecting with your coworkers and your colleagues somewhat difficult. Interaction that happened primarily in elevator lobbies and along the way. So as we began this project, we were given a pretty clear directive from Expedia that they wanted to change the culture in a way to respond to the opportunity that we had with this site, to change the culture in a way that really emphasized the notion of, in their words, to think, create, and connect. And so this was a word scramble that they put together for us, focusing on the notion of collaboration and technology and connection. And again, especially with taking full advantage of the opportunity that we had on this particular site. And with the idea of really emphasizing the idea that collaboration was going to be key to the future culture of the space. We began our work looking at a couple of master plan opportunities that would, number one, transform the existing buildings and repurpose those into workplace sufficient to accommodate the think, create, connect mandate of Expedia. Create some opportunities to expand the site for future development and growth, and really take advantage of again, incorporating that with the site in a way that maybe previously hadn't been done. Some of the first instincts we had was the notion that we needed to create a center of gravity, if you will, or a center of energy for the site, what's depicted as a heart. And one of the options at the time was to put that somewhat central to the existing buildings, with the idea that as the site expanded to the south, or as it expanded to the west and north, that this would still remain somewhat central. But given the entry problems that I talked about, where following the green arrows, one comes in from the north, we've found this was really challenging and probably exacerbated the problem that we talked about earlier of not really having a good sense of where the entry of the project is or should be. So we quickly migrated to another thought, and that was to place the heart in that space that I showed you during the drone flyover that is now was open space, and to create a center of gravity that still was central to the existing buildings, accommodative of expansions to both the north and the south, but really helped clarify the notion that entry was an important aspect and arrival was an important aspect of this. We also, with our design partner and the landscape firm of Surface Design Incorporated, started to think about the opportunities that the site had in terms of identifying place and activity and experience, and establish some sense of intentionality to the relationship between the site and the landscape and the buildings to really follow through on this notion of think, create, and connect. And so we began to identify opportunities within the site, opportunities that in some ways recalled some of the history of the site with the idea that there were trains that once delivered goods to this site, that there was a pier there, and there was a beach at one point. And so we started thinking about how do we really begin to think about the landscape and the buildings in a way that acknowledges some of that history in a somewhat subtle kind of way, but a real way in terms of creating place and acknowledging, again, this particular spot in Seattle. We also thought about it in terms of providing an infrastructure for the buildings, one that created some logical and understandable way to find oneself through this site. We were going to be developing up to 1,200,000 square feet in a mostly horizontal orientation. So it became pretty apparent to us that we needed to find a mechanism to really begin to create wayfinding in a real way that didn't rely on signage, didn't rely on directional kind of information, but really was built into the circulation, built into the architecture of the space. An opportunity to create opportunities for discovery and collaboration and collision and retreat and relaxation and exploration. And some of our first instincts were to celebrate the orthogonal nature of the existing buildings and to build this infrastructure in a way that was consistent with that, thinking in terms of streets and avenues and pocket parks, if you will, built around the notion of a central park where the intersection of these major thoroughfares would happen. That gave us an opportunity to identify entry and gave us an opportunity to identify centrality, but also begin to expose a system of networks, street networks that would really give some clarity as to how to get around to there. We quickly changed our thinking though and began to think more of a disruptive circulation system, one that could really mediate the difference between the existing buildings and what would be the new buildings. So one that would begin to really acknowledge different places within the site and create different senses of destination. And importantly, I think, intersect with the existing buildings in a way that created differentiation within each one of the buildings to help identify where one might place themselves and understand that I'm in building A, B, or C, and I'm in this particular location, and have that be different than the similar locations in other buildings. So we really embrace this notion, and this diagram, I think, will show up in a number of other images that we show, but the idea that this major circulation system, this disruptive kind of approach to the orthogonal nature of the existing buildings was something that would be really built into both the planning and the programming and the architecture of the building. We began to identify this diagonal as Broadway, thinking of Broadway as the street or the avenue that along which different kinds of activities happen, along which major areas like Times Square happen. So we began to, at least internally, think about this as Broadway and build the design around that notion. So having established the sense that the heart would be central and that it was going to mediate the difference between the conversion buildings and the new phase buildings, we really began to start thinking about how do we begin to develop architecture around that, plan around that, and make sure that this heart was not an unused space. It was really critical to the planning that it be the most active part of the campus for every minute of the day, so that it didn't just fill up during certain portions of the day like lunch and so forth. So as we began to program it, we thought about it and said it's got to be a place that can accommodate all hands meetings. In one hand, it can also be a place that can accommodate the very small encounters. During the day, it could be a place for meals, but not exclusively that. It could be a place for particular functions and events. And put all of this together and say, how do we really develop a space that again, is never empty, is the center of gravity of the campus, is the place where one would expect to encounter a peer or a colleague at some point during the day without having to have planned that. You could just be there, and at some point you're going to run into that person most likely. And the principle that we started to think about was to really focus on this space more from the standpoint of a space of hospitality, a place that, like in hospitality, was active all of the time, was flexible enough to accommodate different kinds of functions, and really, really kind of again became the center. This is that space that I pointed out in the drone flyover that was previously exterior space. You can see kind of the subtle outline of what is the drum that was part of building J, and this is that once isolated building up against some of the existing buildings. So the idea here was to take this once exterior space, create a major interior space with it, and have that space be kind of the most active part of the campus very deliberately. We began to think about how would the architecture reflect that function, taking that exterior space and making it interior, and what do we do with the artifacts of the existing buildings? Do we keep the drum and celebrate it and find a way to integrate it into the space? Do we deconstruct it at some point, keeping some remnant or relic of it, but again acknowledging that maybe it's no longer a functional part of the space? We did a lot of thinking about that, and this is, before we're really designing the building, but really beginning to think about, just how might this planning exercise that we're doing begin to reflect itself in terms of the built form. And the master plan began to develop around that notion with the idea that the more gregarious part of the architecture would be focused around this heart, that we would begin to celebrate the notion of this circulation diagram through the existing buildings, with forming major avenues, creating bridges between the existing buildings, and begin to really have the architecture reflect the diagram that we felt was so important during the planning process. The previous slide showed kind of the full build out. We needed to think about this in terms of phasing. So this diagram represented what phase one would be. Again, having constructed the heart and really going on to the first component of the expansion of the project. We also did a lot of test fitting and planning to think about how do we take these buildings, array workplace throughout it so we have an efficient layout of the workspace, distribute the amenity spaces throughout there, and celebrate the circulation as it goes on. And we came to a pretty early decision that, given the three-story natures of these buildings, that this circulation system ought to happen on the second floor, and it ought not happen on all floors. And the rationale behind that was to say, we really wanted to create it as a special place within the campus, the thoroughfare on which all Expedians would be traversing, communicating, and passing through the space. And in the existing buildings where the first and third floors did not have that circulation, to really take the opportunity to create vertical circulation, stairs. Stairs became a really important part of the planning here, because we were trying to get the notion that let's get out of the elevators, let's get into the stairs, let's use the stairs as a place to communicate and interact, and let's make those spaces really come together that focus along this, as we call Broadway, and have Broadway really get to the center space, and in that case have a multi-layer or multi-level opportunity for the circulation to happen. Having done the test fit and having put an awful lot of reliance on the idea that these avenues were going to be the places where people circulated, we felt really compelled to test the notion. And so here's 1 minute version of a 12-hour day at Expedia, where we're really monitoring the number of people that are coming, the time of day, how many of those people are at their desks, how many are in the heart of the project, how many are in meetings, and play this out through the course of the day so that you can see you could see the movement. You could see as you get close to lunchtime that while this really begins to activate in the central off, it's never empty. And even in the beginning of the day and even at the end of the day, there's still activity going on there, and that activity changes based on what time of day it is and the function. So this for us was a real test that said, you know, there's some real meat behind the idea that the circulation system can work. There's an opportunity for people to kind of traverse from one part of the campus to the other without having to really feel like they've traveled long distances. And it really gave us an opportunity to have confidence in the fact that this system was really going to work. And we began to really develop now some of the architecture, begin to integrate that with the notion of the landscape. Again, working with surface design, we brought in the master plan into the site plan that began to reflect some of the history that we talked about, the notion that, you know, there was a rail spur, there was a pier, there was a notion of beach. Uh, pick up on the idea that this site ought to have different senses of place, different senses of experience, going from the entry, having departed what is mostly an industrial zone, coming to a place of importance, which is the entry of the building, giving some signal that this site is on water. The notion of maybe bringing a quay into here that really helps signify the entrance of the building. Creating a sense of a great lawn, a terraced great lawn that gave everybody access to the exterior, that really began to celebrate in a much more open way than previously the site on the bay. And to think about potential for off-site structures, structures that one needs to leave the building and get to, playing with the notion of biophilia, playing with the notion that one can leave the main campus and really depart and arrive someplace else and have a different experience in the course of the workday. As we began to develop the architecture a little bit, again, I think that one of the more energetic, one of the more kind of gregarious portions of our work at this time was to really think about the importance of this central space and the idea that we needed to really celebrate it as a place of arrival, as a place of energy, as a place of a different kind of experience and of coming together of all of the different people. And to play that out so that at once, while it was different, we began to think about the notion that maybe the new buildings would take on some of the character of the existing orthogonal buildings, playing with the notion that, you know, the new and the existing ought to create an opportunity for employees that was not so differentiated that one might feel they were in a primary or secondary kind of space, but that there was an equality about these kinds of spaces. And, you know, I'm going to pause for a second on this slide because there are some on this phone who will recognize this as a real milestone time in the project. And it was a time when we looked at this and we were asked the question, we asked ourselves the question, you know, we've really happy with the planning. We're really proud of kind of the logic that's going into this thing. But we're left with a question that, you know, are we leaving some opportunities behind? And it was a question that came directly from the chairman, Mr. Diller. When we presented this, he said, it makes a lot of sense to me. I really understand what's going. I love what's happening at the entry. But I'm wondering if we haven't missed an opportunity to maybe do something more. Which led us to the next phase of our exercise, which was to really begin to drill down on the notion of architecture. And we looked at a number of different approaches, some of which really maintain the notion of the rectangular quality of the building interfaced with the more gregarious part of the art. We looked at the idea of maybe changing the scale of some of those rectangular forms, maybe changing the orientation and beginning to put some energy into those as options. And then the notion of maybe it's time to do a major departure. Maybe it's time to say, you know, this is a new building, this is a new time. And while it's integrated with the existing buildings, maybe it needs to take on a little different responsibility, some responsibility to create some different sense of spaces within the campus, create opportunities to celebrate a place different from the Great Lawn, an opportunity to really play up the notion of different orientations out of that building. an opportunity to think about it as being almost the inverse of the existing buildings, which was more about glass and view and openness, but still be constrained by the notion that we couldn't create an environment that was so dramatically different that one who was in the new building would feel different than one who was in one of the existing buildings. But it really began to create some energy for us that said, there's an opportunity here to be able to do all of that, and we shouldn't be bashful about it, and we shouldn't be hesitant about the idea that we can really create a differentiated piece of architecture that really signals arrival of somebody different here, a new function here, that really celebrates the site in a different kind of way, which emerged into this form. This is actually a photograph with some drawing over it of a model that when we presented this scheme, and it was one of these great moments that every project has when we were presenting this to the executives at Expedia, and the building took on this new form, this new curvilinear form. And we were feeling really good about how it was going, and I will never forget the smile on his face and the opportunity that Mr. Diller took to reach down at this model that we had spent a fair amount of time putting together. And he took the 4 floors of the new building, and he pulled the model apart, and he twisted them on each other, and he rotated them around a kind of a haphazard axis, and he said, now I think we can have some fun with this project. And it was one of those moments where, again, I think every project deserves a moment like this one, because I think it really began to establish for us the opportunity to really do something really different, really dynamic, and to really play around with the idea that that the aspirations of the client were something more than just purely functional. The landscape began to change as a product of that too. We began to think about, should the landscape begin to pick up some of this energy? Should the landscape begin to kind of relate to this new form and depart from the idea of orthogonality and so forth, and begin to think about how do we create special spaces as a product of this freeing up from the orthogonal relationship of the buildings, yet still maintain some of the notion that is reflective of what this site is. It is, after all, a site that was filled and was held by riprap to define the corners. A site that, one should expect a beach when you're on the waterfront. A site where we took the Centennial Park and the public bike and pedestrian trail and began to say, this needs to be an experience, something more than the dangerous right-hand turn that used to exist out there. And can we really begin to think about public interaction on this site, public space and accessibility and public enjoyment of this site, so that it's not only just Expedians exploring it and appreciating it, but the public being able to appreciate it, and having that line between the public space and the private space and the secure space be somewhat blurred, somewhat opened up, so that there is this message here that we are all enjoying this space, we are all partaking in the opportunities that this site provides. So as we concluded schematic design, we began to think about and began to display this, and not be bashful about the notion that this new building was going to be more open and more glass. This entrance space was going to be a point of undeniable entry to the site, undeniable in terms of its importance, but revealing some of what was going on, not only inside with the activities and the circulation of people transitioning across this space, but also emblematic of the fact that there was something beyond, there was something really beyond this space that ought to reveal itself in this entrance sequence. There was something about the anticipation of arriving here, the anticipation of leaving this space to something else, and having some of that revealed to one as you came upon this. And then looking to some of the existing buildings and saying, to make this transition a little bit more believable, to make this transition a little bit more compatible, maybe we begin to do some modifications to the existing buildings that really began to define this entrance as a new gesture, incorporating the existing and the new, but making sure that it wasn't a stark line drawn between the two, the one that was much more compatible, one that was much more kind of conducive to the fact that all of this was new. So a series of renderings again at the schematic design phase, where we began to understand the energy that was potential in this building, and keep this rendering in mind, keep a couple of these renderings in mind as we go forward, because I think one of the things we're really gratified by is the fact that I think as you begin to look at the finished product, it was pretty representative of, these renderings were pretty representative of where we were able to end up, and it's something that we feel really great about and really proud about. This is on the south side of that entrance, and so some of that same transparency that you see upon coming upon it at the entry is here once you've arrived. That again, from the Great Lawn, you can look into that and beyond the entryway. We begin to really mediate the notion that the new and the old come together, and both have been transformed in a way that changes the quality of this space and really identifies the quality of this space. And an architecture that is dynamic and forward-thinking and suggestive of movement, suggestive of something that's going on inside that's pretty interesting, and some people who work here that are probably pretty smart, and some activities that are going on that are pretty important. And I think all of these kind of played into the notion of developing an architecture that created this transparency that we're talking about. Haruka tagged this show kind of vision to reality, and I'm going to jump to some of the reality, some of the slides that exist. And again, this is a series of photographs. We have yet to shoot this professionally. These are shots that were taken over the course of the last year, some of which will show you have construction going on the inside of them, some of which begin to reveal what the finished product may be. But I think all of which start to show that maybe we were delivering on the promise that there was going to be something really pretty special about this. So here is the formal honorific entry, looking back at that central heart space, new building on the right, existing buildings on the left. And as you approach it, the idea that playing on the notion of anticipation, playing on the notion of transparency, if you could imagine this being occupied, people transitioning across those ridges, activity happening within that space, and again, giving one a peek, a window, if you will, that there is something beyond that's pretty interesting, that is compelling. And I think it begins to really show in this photograph the idea that there is an interesting entrance experience that's happening, crossing over the bridge, crossing over the water feature that was created, arriving at the front door, knowing that there was something beyond, and having that space really be representative of the importance of that relationship. And have the landscape really begin to kind of reflect and support the energy of the architecture. I love, this is one of my favorite views of the project. It's one that says, the notion that the buildings come together, the new and the old, that the landscape begins to support that there is an energy created here that starts to create different kinds of spaces. It's not apparent when one arrives along the central arrival axis that you are on the beach, that you are on the waterfront. And I think the fact that the mounding and the forms that were created through the landscape architecture really support that. Yet they also provide what I think is a highly energetic kind of space. The water feature is an amazing work, both visually and audio. It really changes the experience and gives an incredible sense of experience of arriving at the site. The water feature on the left, again, I think is one of those places that it's reflective of the fact that there's water. It doesn't necessarily reveal that we're on the waterfront, but it creates an experience that I think is unforgettable, both from the standpoint of arrival and departure, but also from the standpoint of creating a space that is really different than the Great Lawn. the lower left, the idea that my pathway from the front door to the parking garage can be an interesting one. It can be one that really starts to, again, define space and create an experience that is something more than just walking a straight pathway to the garage. And again, these shots were taken in the dead of winter, and we've yet to see this when the trees are fully in blossom and in bloom. And I think the anticipation that I have anyway for this site as spring is arriving, as we begin to think about this landscape coming to life, just is really, really exciting to me, and I can't wait to see it. The notion that, even pathways that were intended for weather protection, even pathways that were really, um, part of kind of the ground plane, created some energy and some excitement and some opportunities to really reveal the incredible thought that went into these buildings and the incredible differentiation of the experience that one has walking around the buildings. The dynamics of the building itself and the expression of the structure, which is reflective of the need to really identify some amazing structural challenges on this building and make it an exciting part of the pathway is really something we're pretty proud of. The energy that's created by the shift, the twisting of that model, creating the opportunities to generate the kind of energy that is evident in this particular elevation on the right, to have it end in a really dynamic way, shown in the photographs on the left, creating in excess of a 20-foot cantilever at the northwest corner of the building, and have that really be something that energizes this particular part of the site, something that's unique to this particular spot that is different at the other end of the building. The opportunity for that building to both engage in and reflect the quality of the environment and opening of the views, the experience of being on this great lawn, the energy that was put into the pathways that's reflective of the diagrams that we had talked about earlier. And again, construction shots and, devoid of people, devoid of the plants really being mature, but I think, and giving us great anticipation of what this is going to be like when it's occupied, when it's in full bloom, and what the opportunity for this space is really going to be. What we call the back porch, where it's the coming together of the new and the old. It's the expression of the beginning of some of this circulation system that is so apparent in the planning, and have it be reflective in the architecture, so that I think I look at these images and I'm having experienced this space, I just feel like this is the place of coming together. This is the place of anticipation and collaboration and energy. It's an amazing experience to see in real life. Taking opportunities, as in this case, to connect the existing buildings and to really have that what was once an exterior space become an important interior space, even in the kind of the functional entrance to the building, which is proximate to the parking garage, to say that there is some notion of anticipation, there's some notion of revelation of what's going on the inside, and some notion that you've arrived at an important place and something interesting is going on inside, and you really just wait. And then going inside and having that space, as much as it's reflective on the outside of what's going on the inside, have the inside be open to and reflective of what's going on the outside. Have it be a place of energy, have it be a place of movements and activity, and have it be a place that is really an extension of the exterior, reflecting some of the water features that on the outside come to the inside, and have those not only be visual expressions, but have them be functional ones. They form, if you will, the security barrier, from the public space to the secure space. An idea that maybe something more than walls and ropes and guardrails can really serve a function and change the experience, both visually and audially in the space. Have the exterior come into the inside in a way that blurs that line, and have a very transparent wall that says, Is it the same space? Is it a different space? Maybe it is the same space, even though they're separated. And to begin to express, as we talked about in this diagram in the upper left-hand corner, the notion of movement and have it be reflective, at least in this space, in all three floors that pass through this space. So again, it would be much more interesting, I'm sure, to see this in the course of a real working day when there were people in here, but I'm just so anxious to see it when it is occupied. I'm so anxious to see it when people are working. And that diagram that we showed with the movement, to have that really come to reality, I think is something that I can't wait to see it for this site. And to have that street, what we call Broadway, extend to the south. And this is the beginning of what will be that extension through the existing buildings across the bridges that bind those buildings together and that really tie this together. And have it be more than a hallway. Have it be something that, in fact, really houses activity, a place that participates in the space on the interior, that provides opportunities for meeting and collaboration and respite along the way, and have it be a place that anticipates activity and exposure to the exterior, and one that anticipates that this is more than a hallway. This is an important place for important people. This is that space. This is that atrium space. You can see in the lower right-hand corner remnants of that drum, or expressions of that drum, as something that's part of the functioning of this space. But that overall, this is a space that is not a cafeteria, is not a food hall, is not a meeting space, is not a general assembly area. It's all of those things. It's one that people can have small encounters, one that we can bring the entire population into and have all hands meetings, one in which meeting spaces kind of participate in that with the hanging conference rooms, ones that begins to really reveal, again, the activity. This is the activity center of the campus. This is the place where somebody that you want to meet during the course of the day will be there at some point in the day, even if you don't plan it. And the idea that that space is an extension of the exterior and vice versa. Much of this wall opens up, and on the right kinds of days can really open out onto the exterior. And the anticipation is that there will be the same kind of seating and activity happening on the outside on a good day as happens on the inside. And when it's not a good day, you'll be able to really enjoy what's happening outside, or at least appreciate what's going on outside from the inside. The bridges that connect the existing buildings, bridges that cross over and through and land in different places in each one of those buildings, creating different kinds of spaces in each one of those buildings. You know, when the building was partially occupied, you couldn't reserve a seat on the bridge. I don't think there's a picture that any of us had during that time when the building was occupied that there wasn't somebody sitting here working in one of these chairs. And really gave us confidence that, you know, the notion that the circulation system was vital to the planning of the building really worked. We were thrilled about that. And the notion that the stairways, the vertical transportation along that pathway really connected the first and the third floors to the second floor where those bridges existed. Really active zones, really areas that opened up floors 1 through 3 in a way that signified a pretty important place, a pretty important transitional place, a pretty important point of energy, and a place that could be celebrated. In the case of the murals that were painted on the walls by Ethan Mural, the notion that there's something special about this, there's something that we really ought to signify, and the art was really appropriate to kind of plan that first to third floor kind of expression, and have the stairs be something that you could use to really kind of circulate and meet. And even in the heads down spaces, even in the workspaces, celebrate the notion that what once was cellular research labs with 9-foot ceilings is all of a sudden opened up to 15-foot high ceilings that express the incredible structural framework of these concrete buildings that allows the mechanical and electrical systems to really show up in there, but also establishes this place where I can work, and I can work in quiet comfort, and I can work in collaboration with others, and I can feel like I'm really part of an important endeavor. To celebrate the opportunities for views in the conference areas, and really celebrate the notion that this site is unique. This is not a site to be found in very many places in the world. An opportunity to see industry, culture, nature, all from one spot, and be able to do your work in that same place. And the opportunity to really think about, the non-workspaces, the amenity spaces, the opportunities to meet, the opportunities to rest, the opportunities to depart from your desk and find another place to work. And in this particular case, the shot on the left is actually in the basements of the building, a place where there is an incredible concentration of meeting spaces, but we feel really gave us the opportunity to celebrate, again, this notion of collaboration and connection. Taking the opportunity, as many as we could with the staircases, to create social points, to create points of opportunity to stop, points of opportunity to rest, points of opportunity to meet, and have them all be different, so that there was also this notion of identity. I know where I am based on the configuration of this particular stair, and based on the configuration of this particular social point, and even the appointment of it with the fabrics and the colors and the lighting and so forth, to recognize that there's an opportunity to identify unique places within this million square feet of space that is otherwise might be very much the same. To take the notion of food, there was early on, there were certain things that we couldn't say. We couldn't say food hall. We couldn't say cafeteria. And it was because of the notion that they wanted the experience of food, which was really important. To be an experience that was more focused on hospitality, more focused on experience, more focused on the idea that it might change on a week-to-week basis. And so we played with the idea, along with our partner Aberco, who did the planning and design work for the food halls, to think about these as somewhat of a marketplace, to think about it somewhat as pop-ups, if you will, so that each station provided a different experience, a different food, a different opportunity to kind of engage, and really think about it, again, much more from a hospitality standpoint than a typical corporate workplace food service opportunity. Just think about the notion that this is part of the workday, which is the social interaction. This is part of the workday where, instead of walking along a line and grabbing and going, having a different kind of a relationship with the person behind the counter who is making your food, who is serving your food, who is providing the services that you're looking for, and have it be a social space that would be active in the course of the day, even when it wasn't lunchtime or breakfast or late afternoon snack. And to think about, I didn't mention this, but the new building has not been fitted out yet. So we're in the planning process of doing the planning for fitting out of the new building, and beginning to really think about the opportunities when this building opens up, and we'll go from the main lobby out to the nod, out to the west, to the water. And to think about the energy that the architecture of the building has, helping define the circulation system of the interior of the building. Again, these are in planning stages. We're in the process of building out some of this space, this one in particular, which is the connection from the existing lobby to the west, to the landscape. But to really play on the energy that, this building, while it's different from the existing buildings, the retrofitted buildings, it has some of the same componentry in it. It has there's a familiarity with the workplace components. There's a familiarity with the social points. There's a familiarity with the attitude that says this is really about encounter and connection. And just before I go to the final shots here, to think again about the landscape. Surface design, we think, did an amazing job. We planted up to 1,000 trees on this site. This site was put together in a way that really celebrated both the history of the site and the opportunities for change and growth and the opportunities for experience with the site. So as we think about it, the notion of what we call the knot or the meeting area or the beach, or the point, which is the public space, and here's the new trail that connects up to the existing trails. The opportunities to integrate outbuildings or site structures with the landscape and have them emerge out of the landscape yet be important parts and destination parts. The opportunity to really define the entrance to the project and to really form and celebrate the movement of the architecture and have that be expressed both in the horizontal planes and in the vertical. So a quick series of slides that hopefully kind of give you a sense, again, midwinter shots taken before this landscape has really come alive, but I hopefully will give you some sense of some of the care that's gone into this and some of the thinking that's gone in, and hopefully remind you of some of those early sketches and convince you that I think we delivered on what we had promised with the architecture of the project. And the care that went into defining those different kinds of spaces, the great lawn defined by the terraces, with lighting and detail that really is something more than just a two-dimensional line on a plan, but really a three-dimensional experience that changes the upper terraces from the lower terraces, that reflects the kind of change that goes on this site. The kind of detail that went into thinking about bioretention, the kind of detail that went into thinking about circulation on the site. What we call the prow, which is really, it's a meeting collaboration space out in the site that emerges out of that landscape. It emerges out of those forms, those terraces, of the same materials. An amazing structure built, designed by Adlin Darling, amazing collaborators on this particular project with us. And some of the formations, this is the knot that I described outside. It's a terraced amphitheater, if you will, that could hold 9,000 people in an event. And certainly one that's conducive to bringing all expedients together, one that has the potentiality for, I think, public kinds of use. It's close to the public space. There's an opportunity for secure type interactions to go on out there. But the idea that it has proximate location to the public space, that we tried to really blur that line between the public and the private while celebrating both. The beach, the notion that there could be water here, but this is clearly a signal that this is a waterfront type space. The point, the coming together of the beach, the public space, the point, the public pathway that now runs in a really soft curve around there and giving access to the public at the highest place on the site. One that really, I think, gives the opportunity to really celebrate the notion of public not only being welcome to come here, but being welcome to have activity here, being welcome to really enjoy this as a place, as a new space. Something that's really, I think, integrated into a different kind of experience along that waterfront. And blurring the line between what is public, what is secure, with the idea that there is a transparency here, there is an openness here, even though there is a secure line here. And the important part of that is that it's not about keeping the public out or the expedients in. It's about kind of changing that relationship so that on the inside I can really feel part of what's happening outside that fence line. I, after all, want access, and so there's many points of access where one can get in and out of the site. But again, importantly, visually making sure that it feels open. Making sure that the fence, while it's secure, has some kind of reference to the idea that it's a beachfront, it's a waterfront kind of thing. It's transparent. It really breaks down that visual barrier between the public and the private. A view taken from the point, looking back at the site. This is the secure fence along here, but the notion that this is really about one space, I think, is really apparent in this slide. And again, the beach with the idea of fire pits, driftwood that was brought in, patterning of the sand, revelation of the terraces. Here is the emergence of the prow that I had shown you a picture of a few minutes ago. All of which really combines to be it's part of a common experience that includes, views of the mountain, access to the water, views of downtown, and a signal to the proximity of that, and even kind of compatibility with the notion of a much more industrial kind of use, all of which kind of comes together to really make it a different and more holistic experience of the site. Particularly like this slide because I'm fully anticipating the idea that this doesn't have to happen only on sunny days. The idea that the wind and the rain and the exposure to the elements is a major part of what can happen here, and I think a major part of what will be enjoyed. One just has to dress appropriately, but the opportunity to really experience nature in a way that allows for and accepts the changing of the environment, changing of the weather, I think is really exciting. I think will be heavily used. And a couple of shots that we managed to take at the end of last summer before the plants went dormant. There are a few slides that give me great hope that says when spring comes and we come back alive and the plants come back alive, that there's the opportunity to really see this again. This is the moment that I am longing for, the moment that I am really looking to, the end of COVID, the beginning of the spring and summer weathers, the opportunities to again collaborate and interact and experience along with other people an amazing opportunity on a site like this. And Stacy mentioned this. I think it's really important that there's a lot of people to acknowledge on this project. There were literally thousands of people that I couldn't begin to name, hundreds of organizations. And I want to share a little bit about that with you, but I do also want to acknowledge that we are on the land of the Duwamish and the Squamish. And I think I hope that we have done honor to this site, that we have somehow celebrated the opportunities that exist here, to appreciate the incredible place that we were able to occupy. And I just feel really, really proud that we have been able to be a part of this. And so just in closing, I'm not going to read them all, but I will promise you that there are people, starting with our amazing client at Expedia Group, their representatives of the Seneca Group, who really created for us an amazing opportunity to be a part of this project team. Our team, our associates, our consultants, and the hundreds of people associated with this. ZGF alone had over 103 different people in our office alone work on this project. And it's indicative of, I think, the importance that we placed on it and the opportunity and the challenge that was ahead. Our partners in construction, GOI, and there are many subcontractors. This was an effort that I think everybody was committed to, an effort that is a product, or that created a product that I think is an outcome that none of us maybe could have fully imagined initially, but one that we think we all appreciate now that we're done. So that's the end of my thing. I'm more than happy and anxious to answer questions, to share with and talk in any way you want to do it, and that we have time for.
Great. We do have at least one question, but now is the time. If you have questions, we have some time reserved to answer them. There is one, Patrick, from Mark. He says he couldn't see it, but does the new building have any component of a green roof?
The linkage between the new building and the and the existing buildings is all living roof. Over that area that once was an exterior space is a living roof fully. The link between the two has a green roof. The new building is essentially covered with some mechanical, but a huge array of PV, a big photovoltaic array over the major portion of the surface of that roof. So there's no living roof on it, but the link between the new and the old is all living roof.
Great. Do we have any other questions? You can just type those in the Q&A box, or I guess the chat box. I guess my question, you probably mentioned it, but I might have missed it. Do they have a schedule of when people will start moving in?
There's not a hard schedule. There is clearly anticipation of. There is clearly some use of the building now in a limited basis. Clearly, focused on the idea of how do we provide social distancing and safety and so forth, and monitoring of that. I think they, like the rest of us, are looking to some point in the next couple of months, hopefully, and maybe sooner. It depends on how things kind of roll out, but there is clearly anticipation of arrival of folks on the site, and I think some anticipation of kind of getting back to some sense of normal at some point in the relatively near future.
Cool. A couple questions. Where is the best spot to see the project? So I assume that's if you're just kind of walking by and wanted to check out some of the cool landscape.
It's amazing. Take a walk along Centennial Park and get to the point of going out to the point and seeing the bike trail, the walking trail. It gives you an amazing sense of the project. There are other points. The flyover that comes off of Elliot Avenue that reaches over to Pier 90 and 91. There are momentary glances of it if you don't drive off the road. One can basically circulate around the perimeter of the site, and so the entry is very visible. Coming across the pedestrian bridge, the Helix Bridge that crosses the railroad tracks, gives you a nice sense of some parts of the site. But I think, how much of it is revealed along the public pedestrian and bike trail, to me, is really gives one a great sense of what's there.
And those fire pits you called out, are those only on the private side, or are they on the public side too?
The fire pit is on the secure side. The secure side. I think there are the driftwood, the beach, the sitting, the terraces all extend out into the public space, but we didn't provide any fire pits out there.
Cool. We need more fire pits in Seattle. Someone else asked, parking. Is there public parking on the site?
There's, we took away the parking that was along 16th Avenue to create that parkway, the extension of the trail. There is a parking structure at the northwest corner of the site that does have public parking in it at the ground level. So the parking that was, I should say, we replaced the parking that was on 16th Avenue with the parking that's in that structure. It's publicly accessible, free parking that gives access to the park, and you're right on the parkway when you there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Kind of quiet out there tonight. Here's another one. Tim, what was the biggest challenge to be overcome? What was the biggest challenge to be overcome? Oh, that to be overcome, or rather only strengthen the project?
I think the balance of, obviously repurposing what were amazing buildings that were built for a different purpose. That really created an opportunity in one sense. The recognition that there was not unlimited budget on this. We were constrained by a rational budget that we were all held to. And I think the desire and the aspirations to do something really special. You bring all those together, and there isn't an easy road to the answer. It's an exciting road to the answer. To say, how do I take these existing buildings and make something special out of them? How do I present opportunities, like the bridges and the connections that go through there? We were literally taking out columns and slabs and structure that were inherent to the basic, structure of the existing buildings to create some of these circulation paths. How do we build a new building that's expressive and different, but have it be not a different experience for the folks who are going to be inside of it? So I think it was constantly a balancing act between saying, I don't have unlimited resources, I'm going to spend them wisely, I have responsibilities to be careful to not create a we and a they kind of atmosphere there. And yet I have expectations both for ourselves and for our clients that we're going to do something really special. How do you bring that together and really allocate the resources and the money and the effort and the design to make sure that you really found that balance?
It looks like you achieved that.
Hmm.
Another question. People are talking about new normalcy at workplace after COVID. Do you think it would cause change the future plan or existing plan somehow?
It's always, it's the question that we're all being asked all the time. And I think one of the things that's really, really beneficial to what's been happening in workplace design is the idea that, there's much more focus on kind of common space and collaborative space. The personal space is really getting smaller. And so what I fully anticipate is that as we come back, whether we come back at 60% or 80%, or even someday maybe at 100%, the idea that those kinds of ancillary spaces that used to be the special amenity spaces that we added to projects have become the really important spaces. So one can have privacy at a desk. We don't have to be sitting next to each other. We can spread out there, and we have opportunities in the more common spaces to really be able to work and to work productively and to work in a way that I think can be safe, work in a way that is still energized, and work in a way that I think is kind of breaks down this barrier that we're all experiencing tonight, which is off of the screens and back face to face. So yeah, I think obviously concerns about cleanliness, concerns about the air environment, concerns about proximities and things like that are factors that can be applied to a lot of the planning that's been done on this project already. So.
Cool. And here's another good question. Can you speak to how you think this project will relate to the surrounding neighborhood culture and the changing landscape of density in Seattle?
Yeah, it's a transitional area. And I think there've been for years lots of questions about what's happening in that whole Interbay notion and that whole Interbay area there. Does it remain maritime, industrial? Does it begin to morph into something? And that's a political question. I have an attitude about it that probably doesn't sit well with maybe what the political attitude is about what goes on. But I do believe firmly that Elliott Avenue will change. I think with Sound Transit coming along Elliott Avenue, with the idea that we're bringing population to there along with transportation there, that I fully expect that Elliott will become a much more maybe retail, and I think definitely will include retail, but I think it'd be a much more approachable, a much more pedestrian friendly, a much more accessible neighborhood. So I fully expect that the Elliott Avenue that we see today will be almost unrecognizable in 10 years, and for the good, by the way.
That's good. And one more project. Oh, here, let's see. Did the project pursue any sustainable initiatives?
Yes, it's both LEED and CITES Gold. We were in the process of final certification. We've pursued Salmon Safe. I think one of the huge sustainable issues of the site was the reuse of the existing buildings. It's always one of the most powerful senses of sustainability. But the whole notion of the bioretention systems that are on the site, the care that was put into providing access and providing exterior kind of orientation. And I mentioned that almost 1,000 trees being planted on the site. So yeah, there are a number of things that I think we're really, really proud about. I expected a question about how did you get so much glass on the new building? It's almost 60% vision glass, and there's a high performance mechanical system, high performance envelope system. There's a PV array that helped us get there. And we're still able to, with all of that, to get LEED Gold. So I'm pretty proud of the work. And, McKinstry, as an example, is owed a huge amount of credit for being able to really pull that off and help us get to the kind of the expression of the architecture that we wanted within the confines of a energy code and within the confines of maintaining LEED performance.
Great. Do we have like one last question? I think that's, one more. In what ways do you think this project is grounded in Seattle in terms of design?
You know, that's a great question. You know, I don't know that there, from an architectural standpoint, there is something that would necessarily be grounded in Seattle. But I think in terms of the intent behind it, the work that was done to integrate it with the site, I think really celebrates the unique condition that existed on this particular site in this particular location. I think what we did with the buildings to really begin to integrate the interior and the exterior celebrates the notion that, you know, Seattle, unlike a lot of places in the country, it does have 4 seasons and it changes. And that change changes the experience within the buildings. So, you know, I think the opportunity to open up public spaces inside and outside, I think kind of smacks in the face of the cliche that it rains too much here. You know, the opportunity to circulate around the site undercover and be outside, and to be able to appreciate the site on less than climate days. In fact, celebrate the notion of wind and rain and you know, sea foam and all of that. I think to me, it's what we were able to accomplish. What we tried to do was to really make a building that was expressive of the conditions of its particular location, this site and this location. And so to that degree, I think it really does, you know, from the standpoint of the facades and those things, other than the fact that they provided us the transparency and the light and the exposure that I think helps celebrate those things. I don't think there is, again, a Seattle style.
Yeah, I think just the connection to the nature and the water.
Yeah.
Really does a nice job. Well, with that, I think we got all of the questions answered. They were all really good. So thank you, audience, for your thoughtful questions. That makes this an excellent presentation. Oh, and some people are saying, wonderful presentation, Patrick. Well done. So people are pleased.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
And I just want to say thank you to you, Patrick, for doing tonight's presentation. I know a lot of thought goes into programs like this, so we really appreciate you doing it on behalf of SAF. And we all hope that one day we'll get to see the actual project in different ways. So we look forward to that. And I just want to let the audience know that next week we have another talk. If you're wanting a different side of architecture, we've got History of Western Architecture in 90 Minutes by one of our tour guides, and it's free for members. And then coming April 4th, we have David B. Williams back with The Secret of the Seven Hills, so geology. And then we've got another ZGF architect, Katerina Stoll, is doing another soiree called Wind Down with Watercolors. And that will be I believe that's April 8th. So we hope to see you again at another one of these. And gosh, hopefully maybe before the end of the year, somewhere in person. We can only hope, right?
Would that be?
Yeah, so people are really excited to walk the path this weekend, and Charles Stone said it really helped him collect and reflect the big ideas on the project as part of the project. So from FMS. So anyway, so yes, everybody's super excited. There's all these comments coming in. So, well, thank you so much, Patrick. It was a pleasure to get to work with you in this small way. So have a wonderful night, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. This was great.
Yeah, good night.
Good night.
Thank you.